Welcome to another episode of Care for Ohio, the podcast. We've been having great discussions over the last 8 months with people from around our state with unique windows into Ohio's democracy. We talk about the influence of corporate PAC money in our politics. We talk about the importance of gerrymandering. And also we talk about how to build a democracy that delivers for all of our communities. Today we're going to have Clerk of Courts of Hamilton County, which is Cincinnati and the surrounding areas in southwestern Ohio, Pavan Parikh. Pavan is a friend, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to Care for Ohio, the podcast. Today, I am so excited to be with Pavan Parikh, the Clerk of Courts of Hamilton County. Pavan grew up in Cincinnati. He served as a minority counsel in the legislature for the state Senate. Now he serves as Clerk of Courts in Hamilton County. Also was a lawyer in the Army Reserves, I believe.
That's correct.
I could not think of anyone better to talk about our democracy and how to deliver great services to people in the state of Ohio than Pavan. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you have served in a lot of different roles, but the first one that I really wanted to ask about was your time in Columbus.
Yeah.
And you saw up close some of the initial debates and discussions about gerrymandering, districting, and fair elections. Could you just walk people through, what did you see up close there?
Well, it was trial by fire. So I joined the state Senate as the legal counsel for the minority caucus in August of 2011, which means if you're looking at a calendar, we were right in the middle of redistricting for that cycle. And so the very first thing I had to do when I got there is read up on redistricting law and election laws and figuring out, what's even going on in this space. And then within days of me starting work, we started the hearings on redistricting. So that was the very first thing that I worked on. And that thread continues. That election law ended up kind of overseeing and being an overarching principle and everything that I ended up working on at the legislature. But the first issue was redistricting, and watching that process up close, seeing what we thought the law said should be happening, and then seeing what was actually happening at the Ohio State House. And there were articles written about the clandestine maneuvers that the majority Republicans were using to draw different maps. They had a secret war room at a hotel next to the State House, then that they were going and meeting in and dividing maps up behind the scenes and trying, to avoid public scrutiny on a lot of this process and wait until the last seconds to release the maps. So initially, right off the bat, it was a great opportunity to see, here is what good government, good governance, law, public policy are telling you needs to happen, that there needs to be input, that people need to be able to negotiate, understand what's going on. And now here's what's actually happening. Here is how people that have been in control and in power for so long that they have effectively forgotten that they are answerable to the people and that they represent not just a party, but all people in Ohio, and are trying to and should be having their best interests in mind. But really, the focus was, how do we increase political power as much as is humanly possible?
Yeah. That's really interesting. A war room at a hotel across the street. Seeing that, I think a lot of our viewers are aware that different states draw district lines differently. And you saw what was really a hyper-partisan district drawing process. And you well know that some states don't draw their maps like this. Right. Some states use independent redistricting commissions. Your time in Columbus, did it inform your opinion on how to best draw legislative and congressional maps in the state of Ohio?
Well, I think there's a couple concepts. One, the idea that you're going to take the politics completely out of it is wrong. You're not going to take the politics completely out of it. However, you can make the process more or less political. And when you have legislators, when you have members of leadership drawing their own districts to protect themselves and their own individual power, that is about as partisan as you can make it. And again, what gets lost in that process is, how are we serving the people, or how are we looking to what the state looks like and ensuring that there is a somewhat equal, or at least representation happening, right? But we were also part of the team that then helped file the lawsuit, Wilson versus Kasich, in 2011, 2012, that challenged those initial maps. And when you put the actual issue in front of that iteration of the Ohio Supreme Court, even though we lost that case as to the constitutionality of the maps, even at that point, the Supreme Court was almost entirely Republican. And you had a large minority, including the Chief Justice at the time, look at the Ohio Constitution and the requirements under it, look at what actually happens, say, this is wrong, this is unconstitutional. We lost by one vote on the Ohio Supreme Court at that time. But I think the fact that you had people that and scholars and practitioners that can look at the language and go, this is absolutely not what we said we were going to do or how we're going to draw these maps. And where that was helpful was it informed then as we try to negotiate, okay, well, how do we rewrite the Constitution? How do we propose something, an amendment that we can put out in front of the voters to rewrite the Constitution to fix the issues that happened in 2011? And so we looked at what was the decision by the Ohio Supreme Court. And one of the key caveats to this decision was they looked structurally at the Ohio Constitution. They said each of these requirements are structurally on the same level in the code. Because of that, we are not going to force a violation of one because they're at the same level because in order to remedy a violation of another. So as we started looking at putting something on the ballot for people to amend the Constitution, some of it was structural. Okay, well, if this particular consideration is subordinate to this consideration, you can structure this in such a way that someone can theoretically direct a lesser violation to remedy a greater violation. And that was the intent behind how that package got put together and got put out in front of the voters that did pass. And then the current iteration of the Ohio Supreme Court said they didn't have a problem with the violations that we've now seen.
Yeah. And during that time period, we saw a really significant change in the Supreme Court.
Right.
Where we saw partisan identifiers added to Supreme Court justices when they were running for election. And that made our Supreme Court even more partisan and even more slanted towards one political party.
Right. So back in 2011, when we were in front of then the O'Connor court, it was a majority Republican. But at that time, there were no partisan identifiers on Supreme Court candidates. So you went off of the campaign, you went off of the name, but you didn't go off of is this a Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate? And what ended up happening was the Democratic Party had fielded some very, very strong candidates over the next couple of cycles. So we got to a point where Democrats had multiple seats on the court. And with the potential risk that Democrats could take a majority of the court. And so the legislature stepped in and said, well, now we're going to make this a partisan race. We're going to make these for courts of appeals and the Supreme Court. We're going to make, you have to say if you're a Democrat or Republican. And the calculation, I believe, was one of we will give up winning the majority of the seats or even the entire court in a place like Hamilton County that has a one county district court of appeals. We'll give that up if it means that we control the Ohio Supreme Court, because at the end of the day, you can appeal from a district court up to the Supreme Court. So we will win eventually in the end. And one of the particular issues was this gerrymandering issue and the litigation that had brought this issue in front of the Ohio Supreme Court, because under the O'Connor court that still lasted until just a few years ago, the courts ruled 5-6 times that the maps that were being used were unconstitutional, and they set them back to get change. And then the legislature, the Republican-dominated legislature, appealed that to the federal courts, effectively just saying, look, we got to have an election on some version of maps. You got to let it be this version of maps. And in the meantime is when they put the partisan designations on the Supreme Court races. So when it eventually came back before the court, well, now we control almost all the votes on the court. So it's going to let it slide.
Well, and Republicans at that time had been kicking the can down the road over and over and over again. Finally, they were drawing maps in public, and then right at the last minute, Republicans brought a map from one of these back rooms and said, this is the one we're going to use, not the ones that we've been drawing in public the last few days.
Exactly. And I think something that people also forget is when you look at that package that was put before the voters in 2015 that was supposed to be this amendment that ends gerrymandering, you got to take a step back and think about where Ohio was in 2015. So when that language passes the legislature before it goes on the ballot, you are not that far removed from Democrats winning a lot of statewide elections. In 2012, Obama won Ohio both times, in 8 and in 12. And the candidates in 2014 were not great, some of them, and drove down some of our turnout. And we didn't win then. But through the process of negotiating this, the Republicans really thought there was a very strong chance in the short term, by potentially 18, that the Democrats would win. So they signed on. In fact, they were the ones really pushing this redistricting reform at the time, I think, because their concern was, how can we protect ourselves if the Democrats actually win? Ohio's taken kind of a bit of a shift since the 2014 election. And so that until this year has not really looked as possible as it was in that environment. And so they were pushing this idea of building out this new redistricting commission with the concern that maybe they might find themselves in the minority at the time.
Yeah. Well, I want to shift from redistricting because I think we could probably talk about that the whole time. As I've traveled around, we've done 307 events now. One issue that comes up over and over again, especially in events where there's people under 40 years old, is housing cost and housing affordability. Yeah. And when I look at national Democrats or even Democrats in the state of Ohio, and I listen to their stump speeches, I almost never hear anything about housing affordability or the rights of people who rent the place where they live. This is an area you spent a lot of political capital and time as clerk of courts. Can you tell us what is the lay of the land right now as you see it, and maybe tell people what you have been working on as clerk of courts in that respect?
So you're right. Look, housing is unaffordable. I poke around on Zillow every now and then just to see, well, if I wanted to move someplace else, I can't afford that. It is unaffordable, and there's a lot of reasons why. One is, across the country, and it's especially acute in places like Cincinnati, after the 2008 recession, we just didn't rebound. We didn't build the kind of housing that you needed to build at that point in time. If you look at new starts and construction jobs and new starts in housing, and especially in the multifamily space, we just never started building to the level that we were pre-2006 to 2008. Because of that, there's not enough stock. People are looking for places to live. There's just not enough housing stock. So it has gotten incredibly expensive if you're looking just to buy a house. You start combining that issue with a lot of these private equity-backed massive corporations that are coming in and buying up sometimes up to 50% of the housing in certain neighborhoods, and then renting those properties back to people in those neighborhoods at an elevated rate. One, those companies are coming in, they have plenty of capital, so they're going to outbid someone just trying to find their next home. They're going to pay more than they need to get that property to then be able to jack up the rent when they're renting it out to somebody in that community. What then happens is they don't do the upkeep, and they don't make sure that these properties are habitable. So they have a lot of problems, which then ends up forcing so many of these renters into a situation where they're saying, it's the middle of winter, I haven't had heat in 4 months, nobody's returning my phone calls, I'm just not going to pay rent. And that's the wrong answer. There is a mechanism to come to the courthouse and apply for rent escrow that you could do. But the second they stop paying rent, then this company files an eviction notice on them. And what ends up happening is you get put into this system of going through the eviction process that is very confusing if you've never been through it before. It is, in some levels, quite opaque just by design, and people don't know what to do. Their thought, which I think is reasonable for a lot of renters, is, well, if you weren't living up to your end of the bargain, landlord, then how am I supposed to be paying you rent? And again, there is a mechanism to do this, but what a lot of people do, because they just don't know, if they just don't pay their rent, and that's how they get started with that eviction notice. The process that then is kicked off can have lifelong implications for these people. So what ends up happening is, if you get an eviction filed against you, and then especially found against you, and that is on your record, it's going to impact your credit score, it's going to impact your ability to find jobs, additional housing, it's going to make it much harder for you going forward. So what we have done at the clerk's office is, through the help center that was started back in 2017 when Abtab Hiraval was clerk of courts, we've aggressively invested in that in the last 4 years. When our administration came in, we had about 2 attorneys and a paralegal. We're up to something like 7 or 8 attorneys now, like 4 or 5 paralegals that are working on these issues. So if somebody has a municipal civil issue, like an eviction, you're not entitled to counsel. I think most people think of, you watch Law and Order, you get arrested, you have the right to an attorney. That applies in criminal cases. Yeah. But in civil cases, it doesn't. And these implications of some of these civil cases, again, could have lifelong implications for someone's life. So the Help Center is there to have a place where you can ask basic legal questions. Limited representation. You can come in, you can ask questions. What do I do? I got served this. I don't know what to do. What are my options? Somebody please help me. Yep. What we have been able to build it into now through some great work that we've done with the city of Cincinnati. Council member Mika Owens really pushed on this and helped us get some funding. We've also been able to get grant funding from groups like Interact for Health and the Greater Cincinnati Foundation and the United Way, working all collaboratively together, is we've actually now built up effectively a public defender for eviction cases. So if you get an eviction notice served against you and you come to court, there's a table right in front of the courtroom where we have paralegals and attorneys that will screen you to see if you're eligible. And then we have somebody that can stand next to you and argue your case in court. And this has been so successful that when a case is litigated to finality, 85% of these cases now are going in favor of the tenant. 95% of cases in general that someone's being represented in court are going in favor of the tenant. That may simply mean you just need an extra week to get the money together to make the landlord whole, and then we can wipe the eviction off of your record. But they have somebody now. And this isn't about trying to pull a fast one on landlords. This is saying, look, we're not changing the landlord-tenant law. This is what the law is. We just need you to uphold your end of the bargain. And if it's fair, if both sides are being held accountable to the same level of this is what the law is, then everyone's made whole. And that simple little thing to help. Let's think about the second, third, fourth order consequences. You now have stable housing, which means you don't have kids potentially that are going to school that are wondering, where's our next meal coming from? Are they going to have to live in the car? Are they going to be living at home? You then have a mother or father or a family unit of workers that now don't have to worry about that issue, that can focus on maybe saving a little bit of money. So in case a medical bill comes up or something comes up with school, they can take care of it. And they're not teetering on the edge of losing their housing every single month. And so once you start realizing just how fundamental housing is and affordable housing is, it undergirds everything in our society. Because if people don't have a stable and safe place to live, how can they possibly focus on anything else? And we do that, we fix that problem, we are going to see a massive return on investment across all of our society because people will have stability in their lives. Yeah.
As I've been traveling around, I've been trying to think of, what issues could bring people together? Like whether you're in an urban area in a multifamily housing complex owned by private equity and renting, or, one thing I've seen traveling is in rural Ohio, the analogous situation is mobile home parks.
Yes.
And these are often being bought up by private equity firms. I met a lady in northern Ohio a few weeks ago. She'd lived in this trailer park for about 20 years. Yeah. The trailer's getting older and older. She'd had a fence up for her dog for 15 of these years. Yeah. But then she complained about one of the utility services. I think it was the sewer. Yeah. Was getting backed up over and over again. And she complained to the management of the trailer park, hey, we're paying for sewer services. Right. You're not delivering. And immediately after she made that complaint, they said, you're not allowed to have a fence. And they said that it is an offense where they can kick you out of the trailer park. This fence had been there for 15 years, and it wasn't until she made the first complaint about services not being delivered, all of a sudden they've got her on the docket to potentially be evicted. Yeah. Boy, that woman is similarly in a low power situation versus the private equity firm she's up against. How do we build state law and just services that deliver for all of those people? Because they have a lot in common.
Well, one, you got to make sure people have a seat at the table. Yeah. And that the people that are representing them and their interests actually care. And I think that is the thing that I have seen from working at the legislature, I took a brief detour where I worked in the banking industry, but worked a lot on affordable housing issues. And you see even in Congress when we were trying to negotiate with them at the federal level. So at the local, state, and federal level, the people that have the resources to try to influence these types of policies, they're not the lady who just needs the sewer to work. Yeah. It's the people that own the land underneath that have all the assets and resources to not only lobby where they need to, but to try to shut out the voices of the vulnerable people. And so how we've approached our work at the clerk's office is, look, justice cannot exist if there are structural inequality. Forget about the law. The law is what the law is at a certain point. Yes, we can still go to the legislature and try to change it, but let's just assume the law is neutral, even though we know it's not. Even based upon that assumption, if the resources aren't put in place that both sides have equal footing, there is no justice. And so that's what the Help Center has really been designed to do, because you are not guaranteed that right to counsel or even to talk to a lawyer in civil cases. Is, look, if there's a debt collection case that can impact your credit for the rest of your life and you weren't wrong, you should be able to have somebody help you try to raise the issue. And evictions, I think, are really an important space where this happens. We are also working on, depending on additional grant funding, if it comes through, to expand into the protection order space, both civil protection orders, but also especially domestic violence protection orders, because those are people that are in the most vulnerable state, that are coming looking for help. And if we can help them, they just need that little extra bit of help. But on the flip side, if you look at the impact we're having on the justice system in total, we are creating judicial economy, because when somebody comes to the courthouse and they don't have a lawyer with them, they file something. They file a complaint, they file a motion. If they do it incorrectly, they're going to just come back again and again and again and again until they get it right. If we can get upstream of that issue and get somebody that legal advice on the very front end and say, hey, I see what you're trying to do. Here's what you need to write, how you need to write it to accomplish what you're trying to do. We've now taken what was potentially 5 complaints or motions filed and reduced it down to 1. We are streamlining the entire process for the magistrates, for the judges, for everybody, the prosecutor's office, everybody in the system, and thereby saving taxpayer money and saving time. And that the time now that a judge spends on a case or a magistrate spends on a case, they can spend on the actual merits of the case and really digging deep down, instead of saying, well, I got 20 more hearings I got to get through, and I know 18 of those are going to have to be dismissed because the paperwork was just filed wrong. Let's take that 18 to 2, get it done right, and then everybody wins.
Well, in each of these discussions is really implicit that government's got to be where we do together what none of us can do alone. And one of the questions we ask everybody is about their favorite parks, because parks are such a representation of something that government does that everybody can benefit from. And I'm curious, you've got a young family. Do you have a favorite park in Ohio or in the Cincinnati area?
Well, I feel like if I say one in Ohio, I'm going to get myself into trouble. So we'll at least focus on Cincinnati within Hamilton County. It's probably one that if you've had people from Cincinnati on here, you've probably heard before. But a very simple one is truly Washington Park, because I think of all that it represents, right? It represents that investment we put in as a city and a region into an area that had really seen tough times. But at the footsteps of it, you have one of the most beautiful pieces of architecture in the country in Cincinnati Music Hall. And the resource, and I remember when Washington Park was the old incarnation of Washington Park, where there were fences up around the entire thing. It was a lot of concrete. And it was not a place that you went. And to see how it, one, catalyzed growth in that entire region, both for businesses, but also residential. It brought people back into that portion of downtown that hadn't necessarily been willing to go there before. But the intentionality behind it, there's a playground, there's a space for concerts, there's, a beer garden, there's all these different pockets of spaces that you can go, and the water features that my kids love running through in the middle of summer. That, I think, is a perfect example of, if you built, it's Field of Dreams, right? If you build it, they will come.
Yep.
You build something like this, and now you've got this incredible cross-section of people from across the city, across the region, people coming to visit. They're there with their kids, we're all with their dogs. There's a dog park in there, right? Like, everyone's there as a community. And you see the great diversity of the city of Cincinnati, both racial, ethnic, gender, socioeconomic, now you name it. You see it in one space, and it is a great reminder that what we can accomplish when we come together, that at the end of the day, most of us just want the same things. We want a clean, safe place for our kids to play. We want quality schools. We want our voices to be able to be heard. We want to just be able to be engaged. And quite frankly, we want to be able to ignore a bunch of stuff. I think a lot of people would be really, really happy if they didn't have to worry about nonsense coming out of the State House because it impacts their own personal civil rights. If the State House was purely focused on housing affordability, safety, keeping our lives better, making our lives better, bringing more people to Ohio, helping us grow as an economy, instead of waging these culture wars, which all they're doing is turning people off. Ohio is a slang word for lame stuff now amongst young people. We should all be embarrassed by that, because there was a time, and it wasn't that long ago, where we were the center of the universe, that we were the place where young people wanted to go, where businesses wanted to go, where people wanted to raise their families, where we were tops in education, we were tops in healthcare. Cincinnati built the modern blueprint for law enforcement with the collaborative agreement in the aftermath of the 2001 civil unrest. We've been that in as recently as this century, in the last 25 years. We need to get back to being that again. And I think a lot of that starts with ensuring that our representatives in Columbus, whether they're a state executive office like Secretary of State, or even just as simply as every state rep and state senator, are really focused on how do we deliver for your normal, average, everyday Ohioan to make their lives better, to give them that little bit of extra help, because I just don't see that being the focus of the State House anymore.
And on that, running for Secretary of State, it is an unusual time in American history to be talking about democracy.
Right.
If you look at public opinion surveys, the number of people, especially younger adults, who say it's not essential to live in a democracy, it hasn't been this high since we started doing surveys.
Right.
And how do we build a 250-year-old democracy to survive the next 250 years? So one of the last two questions we ask everybody in this moment is, do you believe it is essential to live in a democracy? And if so, why is that?
I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think so. And by this, I mean my career, both in public service and outside of public service, whether it was with the military, whether it was at the State House, whether it's at the courthouse now, I wouldn't be doing that if I didn't believe, one, in the rule of law in general, that we are a nation of laws and not men, but also the idea that democracy is essential. Because we've seen what happens when you don't have it. And I think that part of the reason why people are less concerned about living in a democracy right now is because they haven't seen it work for them. It's because they've seen what you're getting coming out of Congress, or the lack of anything you see coming out of Congress. They see what's happening at the State House and what are the issues that these democratically elected officials are choosing to care about. And it's not the issues that have 80% alignment amongst all voters. It's not the issues that are going to improve the quality of life, that are going to improve our schools. School funding in Ohio has been declared unconstitutional 7 times for 30 years. Haven't really done anything meaningful to fix that, right? So why does it matter if these people are never going to actually look out for our interests? Why does it really matter that we live in a democracy? And so my charge to anybody choosing public service as a career is, you got to just get stuff done. And that is why people think about, oh, well, an autocrat may not be that bad because they just say stuff and it happens. But if you don't have checks and balances around it, then they're going to say whatever they want for them. And it's never going to be about you. They may tell you it's about you, but it's never really going to be about you. It's going to be how can they enrich themselves? Because those are the type of people that are drawn to those type of roles and those types of systems. So if we have a true democracy, if we have a true constitutional Republican democracy like we have in this country, where you have co-equal branches of government, where you have separation of powers, one, those co-equal branches of government need to do their damn jobs and actually engage in the oversight functions that they were supposed to have and hold power accountable. But two, they got to focus on what matters to people. Because again, I think the reason why those numbers are so low is people are saying, this is not working for me. That when my parents or my grandparents were growing up, you could have one parent working in a household, and you could have a standard of living, and you could afford to pay for college, and you could afford to buy a car, and you could have a house, and you could raise 2 kids. You could take that vacation to Disney World, once a year, whatever it is that you want to do. That American dream, that is lost on at least one, if not 2 to 3 generations right now, because they have no reasonable chance of attaining it, because the structural inequality that's been built into American society, because our representatives aren't doing their job and looking out for us, is making that just a pipe dream anymore. And I think this is the first generation that is on record as saying that they expect to have a lower quality of life than their parents. Yeah. And that should be concerning to us all from a basic humanity perspective, but also what does it mean for governance? Because if they aren't demanding good government, then they're never going to get it. And I think that's why elections like 2026 are so important, because it is an opportunity for us as a city, a county, a state, a country to stand up and say, we're done with getting screwed over. We have got to take back some of the power and authority, because that is fundamentally where all power is derived from in this country, is from the people. We've got to take it back. But we've also got to do it in such a way that we are holding all the mechanisms and mechanics of power in check, that we're holding them accountable. Because if we don't do that, then we're going to be back here in 2 years. And we're not going to make the meaningful change if we do not say to our representatives at the State House in D.C., do your damn jobs.
Yeah. Well, and I think it is an opportunity in 2026. The first 3 months of 2025, when I started running, it was a tough time to run for anything in Ohio. We had just lost everything in 2024.
Yeah.
New Trump signs are going up throughout the state.
Yeah.
And it felt like it might be a fool's errand, that no Democrat was going to win. Boy, something has shifted the last 3 months.
Yeah.
It absolutely feels like we have an opportunity, but we've got to be running great campaigns, building great teams. Otherwise, it's going to be a great opportunity that we miss.
No, I completely agree. And I think that is one of the things that I'm so excited about, looking at the team that we have assembled right now going towards November, is you have people that are a direct contrast to what we're seeing on the Republican ticket. You've got on their ticket, for example, a lot of people that are just playing a game of musical chairs. Oh, well, I was the Secretary of State, so now I'm going to be the auditor. Well, I was the auditor, so now I'm going to be the Attorney General. Well, I did this, then I did that. And people that have spent almost their entire careers just job hopping, led by a billionaire con man, right? So you have that.
Yeah.
And then you look at what our ticket looks at like. Yes, you have a couple politicians, but there are people who are doing the nitty-gritty work at the local level. And I will tell you that when you are a local elected official, you feel the consequences of your actions every single day. And that's why I think local government's honestly one of the best jobs if you're going to be in the political space at all, because every decision you make has a real and meaningful impact on individual people. And you see them, you see it in their faces, and you see it how it impacts their lives. So you got people that we're bringing to the table that have that experience. Mm-hmm. And then you have 2 physicians that are bringing their background and the empathy that you have to be a good physician. Maybe not a surgeon. We'll leave the surgeons out of this. But you bring the empathy that you have to have, that bedside manner of really listening to people, understanding what they're feeling, understanding how to translate that into, okay, here's what I'm hearing from you as to what's going on with your body. How can it then help diagnose what's really going on with you?
Yeah.
And then between you all and then someone like John Kulowitz, who spent his entire career adjacent to this space, but who is a brilliant attorney in his own right, can then look at the systems. Because you're not going to fix any of this stuff if we don't have systems that are built to, one, work well with each other, but also work well for vulnerable people. Yeah. And I think that is something that has been missing. It has been, anytime you take over an organization, there's really 2 modalities you can have. You can be a caretaker and just say, we're going to keep the lights on, we're just going to keep doing what we've been doing. Or you can be a change agent, that you can look and say, Here's a 5-year plan. Here's a 10-year plan. Here's what we're going to do to be different. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to make sure that we are fixing the problems that we have been complaining about for 20 years. And if we've got an opportunity to fix them, we're going to fix them. And yes, process is important, but process cannot be the end game.
Yeah.
It is important to make sure that you are considering all the things you need to, but it's also really, really important to get stuff done. Because if we get stuff done, we can show people that government can work for them, and we can repair some of that rift that you already talked about people believing that democracy doesn't matter because they've never seen it work for them.
Well, this has been a great discussion. The last question we ask everybody, because our theme, playing on the doctor thing, is Care for Ohio, is looking ahead. What does better care for Ohio's democracy look like? Like, what are some concrete things that we could do to provide better care for our democracy, in your view?
Well, I think it goes back to what I just said about, in your professional experience, what you do is you have to listen to your patients. You have to understand what is really the problem here. And then you run a bunch of tests, and you have to look at the results of those tests. And then you have to recommend a course of action. And you don't have the luxury of saying, well, there's only really one course of action. There are multiple courses of action. And each one comes with its risks and its potential rewards. That is systems thinking at a basic level. And that is something that has been missing. And I think that what I see, in the military, you talk a lot about the second, third, fourth order effects of any decision that you're making. What I have seen in Columbus continues to be people that are focused on the 25-yard target and ignoring the 30 or the 300-yard target. What's the quick win I can get right now?
Yeah.
Okay, but what does this mean for everything else we need to care about? So you want to wage a culture war on something small that impacts 1% of the population. Are we focusing on the right 1% of the population? Who's actually causing the problems in our society? Is it the 2 trans athletes, or is it unmitigated spend by billionaires in our political process, right? What are we focusing on? And then what are the second, third, fourth order consequences? If we're going to spend so much time fighting these culture wars, how do we even attempt to recruit young people to come live in our state and help our state grow? How do we retain the ones that are already here? We have world-class institutions in the state of Ohio. Our public university system has historically been the envy of states around the country. Incredible public universities that now the leading Republican candidate for governor wants to dismantle. But then how do you keep them here? Because if you have a state that is so against investing in them and in their future and making sure that the rules work for them and not against them, they're not going to stay here. And so it's having to look at every issue from that systems perspective of, okay, we may fix this one problem, but are we creating 7 to 10 more? Or we're not going to get everything we want on issue 1, but we know that the end state is going to be, we're going to rise that tide on a bunch of other issues. And so, for example, in this particular context, just making it easier to vote, protecting people's private information, not sending to DC and Palantir everyone's social security numbers and driver's license numbers, right? Like those are decisions that seem little at the time, but what's the end state? What are we empowering by not protecting the vulnerable people in Ohio? The idea that you can only have one Dropbox location for voting. Plenty of states make this work. And they make it work because they realize in a lot of ways, like Ohio, one size fits all is not going to work here. Hamilton County is just fundamentally different from Pickaway or Meigs. They're just different. But should people really have to drive an hour to drop off a ballot to vote? That seems problematic. Those basic fundamental things that we just need to be much more cognizant of. How does this impact everybody? And not just because, well, my view is I live in an urban county, so therefore my view has to be the right way because this is what works best for us. Well, it might not work for everybody else. But what I see too much of is people in leadership positions right now that focus on, well, this is what works for me, and that, therefore this is what's going to work for everybody else. Instead of getting people around a table, having a real conversation, going to a trailer park, listening to their concerns in the same way that you can go to a high rise in downtown Cincinnati or Cleveland and listen to their concerns. And how do you marry that common thread as to how we can make life better, easier, more affordable, and just take care of each other?
That is a great note to end on. Pavan Parikh, Clerk of Courts of Hamilton County, Ohio. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Dr. Handley.
Thank you for joining this discussion with Clerk of Courts Pavan Parikh. Pavan is a friend, and I hope you enjoyed listening to him talk about both a democracy that works for everyone and also delivering things like affordable housing and a system that could help people, whether you're in a rural trailer park or you live in an apartment in the city of Cincinnati. That's the kind of vision we need for the future in Ohio. I hope you'll join us next time on Care for Ohio, the podcast.